this is the killing site. You just literally brought us to the dining room table.
I just remember the arms on this thing and the chest was immense.
Kind of back over this direction, an orange light was on the horizon and the field behind us. And I sat there and watched that for about 10 minutes or so, and then it just kind of went down behind that horizon and the group of trees that were back there. The next day I found out that there were 3 cows that were mutilated in that field, the field to the left, and also another farm to the right. Someone saw a Bigfoot in a wooded area right along this riverway.
The possibility for a Squatch to be in this area is pretty good. Knowing the terrain and being that a lot of this is cattle fields, I doubt if there would be a strong habitation. You know, it has the water source, it has the food source, but there's not a lot of terrain where they can easily hide. I think you'd have to go a little deeper in the woods to get a stronger possibility of a habitation. But you know, going from one spot to the other, that's always a possibility. The thing about cattle mutilation in relation to Bigfoot, cattle takes to kill a cow takes a lot of energy to do so. They're easily, you know, they're not like running after a deer or something like that, but you know, it takes a lot to kill a cow, for one, and 2, their hide is very much more dense than, say, a deer hide. One of the telltale signs that, you know, that we look for on a deer kill, as far as Squatch related, is that their neck will be snapped back. I mean, almost to the point that the skull is touching the spine. And, you know, cattle don't have that long of a neck for that type of kill.
So much more populated out here now. Like 30 years ago, none of this stuff was here except a few farmers spread out. So there, a lot of things can be living in the woods.
There's more woods in this area than there was 50 years ago. For the land that was owned by, you know, true farmers, they clear-cutted a whole lot of this area. You got to remember, our ancestors, what was their main source of shelter? Wood. What was their main source of fuel? Wood. What was their source of furniture and building material? Wood. So there was a lot of clear cutting going on, you know, in around the turn of the century for pastures to feed their cattle or for planting their vegetation for harvest. And they would clear out acres at a time of wood. Well, now you have a lot of, what did you say, 3rd generation?
Yeah, the original forest from 300 years ago is not here anymore.
It's gone.
Anywhere in the United States.
Old growth. Yeah, all the woods that you see across Missouri and pretty much across the fruited plain of the United States is really new growth. I honestly believe that the United States, the North American continent, as far as that goes, but I believe the United States is ecologically more friendly for Bigfoot population than it has been in almost 200 years. There is more game. Think about it, 40, 50 years ago, or even more, there was a period of time where deer and turkey population in Missouri was almost depleted to almost non-existence. They had to actually relocate deer and turkey from other states up north down back to Missouri in order to to reestablish the population of deer and turkey in Missouri. Nowadays, you know, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a deer.
I guess I was somewhere 9 to 11 years old, and it was rural East Tennessee. And Mom had to go out, and she said, "I'm going to take the garbage." And back in those days, that's in the early 70s, you know, rural area, you had your garbage can was a 50-gallon drum, and so at the back of the property line. So Mama went out and turned on the light, and it went off the back porch, and I'm just sitting there, you know, watching the TV, you know, laying on the couch, and all of a sudden, these two little creatures ran up on the back porch, and the door was open, the screen door was open, and they ran up and they basically pressed their little faces, put their hands over their heads, and pressed their faces against the glass on the door, and were just staring at me. And it just scared me to death. I didn't know what they were, didn't have any frame of reference. One was about 4.5 foot tall. The other one was about a head, about 4 foot, maybe just a little bit shorter. And they were just staring at me with these big black eyes, what I saw. But basically, they kind of looked like their bodies looked like baboons as far as the hair, and the hair was all disheveled and straight up in the air. Of course, you know, it was dark with a light shining above their heads, so it made them look even more eerie and in the light. But they had the faces were surprisingly human-like. They had wide, flat noses and you know, wide, thin mouths, and kind of round moon pie faces, as they say. And so they were just looking in at me, and I'm just scared to death. And then they looked at each other, and they looked back at me, and then they kind of smiled at me and showed their teeth. And they had these big chiclet-like square white teeth. And that made me feel a little better. Yeah, but and about that time, my mom dropped the lid. You know, the 50-gallon drum had the steel lid. She put the garbage in, dropped that back. Of course, it made a loud, you know, bell-like doing sound. And when it did, they both jerked their heads to the side, and then they turned and ran off the back porch. The weird thing was is when they had their hands above their heads, looking, you know, press their faces against the glass. And when they turned and ran off, instead of putting their arms down, it was funny because they left their arms in the air. But Mom came back in, and I said, "Did you see those two monkeys on the back porch?" And she's like, "Monkeys?" I said, "Yeah, there were two little monkeys back there." She says, "Oh, that was our neighbors, Charlotte and Chucky. They were just messing with, you know, it was in the summertime warm. We were out of school. And like, you know, Charlotte and Chucky are both blonde-headed and blue-eyed." And so I know the difference. And I said, "Well, I don't think that's who it was, Mom." But she said, and that she did mention, she said, "Yeah, but there was a funky, like a skunk smell out back." And so, of course, I didn't know how that correlated or related to Sasquatch till a long time later. But that was my first experience, and I had nightmares up into my early 20s about that experience, because I just really, you know, had no reference for what these things were. And I was watching it, and they happened to have a sketch of Sasquatch holding an infant, and that infant, you know, it was very similar to what I saw, and that's when it kind of clicked. That's what, you know, that's exactly that's what I saw. And so that kind of being able to identify what these things were, you know, kind of ended these nightmares and this mystery that, you know, what had I seen as a child. Basically, it's a beautiful spring day. I've gone fishing on a local lake, Tellico Lake. It's about 30 minutes from my house, and it's not long after daylight. It's one of those beautiful mornings where the water's very clear and very calm. Sun's coming up. It's warm, and I'm a bass fisherman. So those who are familiar with how to bass fish, I was throwing a topwater lure and off this long point of land, and I don't know why I did it. It was just silly, but I had been watching during my lunch hours at work. At the time, I worked in an office where I was by myself. And so during my lunch hour, there was nobody to talk to or anything. So I had got YouTube had just really gotten started, and I was just picking different genres to watch, and I stumbled upon these Sasquatch researchers, and I thought they were a hoot and hilarious. And there was they did one video where they went out at night and was doing the whoops and stuff. And so for some crazy reason, just looking around, I decided I was going to do a few half-hearted whoops. Of course, they echoed unbelievably. The water was calm, and if you've ever been on the lake, just very small sounds will really echo. And so these whoops really boomed. And I was looking around behind me where I was fishing, was a high scale neighborhood, and I was just hoping that nobody was outside yet. But so I went back to fishing after chuckling to myself. I guess I had a few minutes, and I started hearing something coming through the woods. And it was odd because it was, it was loud, and it was a crashing noise, like, something was crashing and thrashing. And so I continue to fish as this thing gets louder and louder. And, finally it's getting close, pretty close to me. And I stopped fishing, and I'm just listening. I'm like trying in my mind to think, what in the world? It was, whatever it was, not trying to avoid making noise. It was, you could hear limbs cracking and breaking, and, the brush being ripped and torn. It was just, a big ruckus. And, sometimes you'd hear a limb or, what sounded like a small tree snapping, or limbs getting snapped. And, I thought to myself, this can't be a horse guy, somebody on a horse who would, ride him that rough. And the end of this point was all grown up. It had briars on it and blackberry bushes, and it was very, very thick foliage. I mean, it just was, just a bramble of weeds and small saplings. So, navigating the end of that point with a horse would be pretty much impossible. And so, I'm, it's just crazy. And so this thing, whatever it is, just gets closer and closer. And so I'm kind of just staring, sitting there holding my fishing rod, just staring, trying to figure out what's going on. And this thing literally comes almost to the edge of the water. The sun's coming up, so you got the sun causing these long, dark shadows. And so, it would, whatever it was, came, right to the edge of the coming out into the light, but didn't, was right back into the shadows. And then it started going back and forth, just, stomping and breaking stuff. And, and I'm just, shocked. It's the only thing, I'm just like, what in the world, what is this? And every now and then with the sunlight shining, I'd get a patch of black, or, see a leg move, or, an arm move, and never more than that. But, obviously something large was in there and going back and forth. And the boat had drifted a little bit, had started drifting closer to the shore. And I kind of looked around like, oh, I'm just a little bit too close here. So I reached down and hit the trolling motor, and that's an electric motor, and it makes a whirl. And of course, except for the thing making all the noise, it's pretty quiet. So when I hit the trolling motor, it makes the noise, and the thing on the shoreline gets really quiet. And it's heard me, and now it's seen me. And I hear it makes some noises, like it moved around a little bit more, and kind of made like a huffing noise. I try to imitate. It's like a oh. And so I just kind of, as I'm slowly, I hit the trolling motor for a couple seconds, and I'm slowly, backing off now. And it does that 2 or 3 times. It's like, well, I've seen what it was making the noise, and it wasn't what I thought it was. And then it just, then it turns and then walks back into the woods, and it's like it was a bipedal walk. And it wasn't making the big ruckus now; it was just walking. So it just crunch, 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 and it just went, out of sight. Went up. I never could see it, but it went. You could hear it go up over the hill and just gone. I couldn't hear it anymore. And so, I was just sitting there, dumbfounded and in shock that, what in the world was this? And so that kind of motivated me to, I knew what this area was. It's a 1,500 acre recreation area. You can't take vehicles in there, but you can, you can ride horses and you can hike and you can hunt and camp and all that stuff. And so the next weekend, I ventured in there to try to figure out what was going on. Most people think that the Sasquatch, they start off when they first get into it, well, it's a bipedal ape. And so let's treat it like a bipedal ape. And I started, I found a place that was odd. It had looked like it was some sort of shelter. So I decided to try to use that place as maybe a place where I could get a picture of them using a trail camera, and started doing the leaving food and leaving gifts and stuff like that. Like people call them gifting stations or whatever, feeding stations. And it just through, about the first 2 years of just bumbling through, with a very basic camera and then buying trail cameras, I started experiencing things and started had a couple captures that were intriguing with my handy cam, and I got on or noticed that I had been over one time working at my little feeding station. I was holding the camera. I was just kind of holding it up against my chest. It was pointed to my left, and I got a couple seconds of something sticking its head through and looking at me, and I kind of got onto that, hey, these things aren't in front of me, or they're peeking at me. And so I kind of developed what I call the back trail camera. And at first it was very, very, very rudimentary. I basically just took a Sony Handycam and strapped it to my shoulder and filmed backwards, and there was no gimbal or anything else, so it was pretty rough. But I began to get some pretty good intriguing footage. I think I got a couple things that looked real good, and so I just kind of developed that. And so anytime I went out into the field, I always had that camera on, and then I had another camera on the monopod. So I was filming just about in every direction, and I learned the hard way never to turn the camera off, because the one time I turned the cameras off, I got what they call a mock charge, where something rushed me in the brush, and right before it was going to come out of the brush, everything stopped. And that's kind of how I developed that back trail camera. And through the years, I honed it, and got a little bit more sophisticated using GoPros and gimbals and things of that nature, so the footage is better, and upgraded my cameras. But using that, I was able to get about, out of over how many years now, 15 years of research, I was able to get about 7 to 10 minutes of footage. A lot of my success came early on, when my camera equipment wasn't so good, unfortunately, when it was 480p, and then I finally was able to save up and buy what they consider HD. But I was able to get some footage. I got the white Sasquatch footage is probably one of my best, and it's another one of those just a couple 3 seconds. And in this instance, I want to say it's 2012, 11, and my son was with me, and we were leaving an area. We were walking out, and the camera was on my shoulder, and unfortunately it's kind of rough. I have to stabilize it. But as we're walking down the trail leaving, there's some to the, if you're looking backwards, at the right side of the trail, or to my left side, this Sasquatch, this white Sasquatch, is coming up behind us, and realizes I've got a camera on my shoulder, and does one of those, does the oops, and ducks down, and I get maybe a couple seconds, 60, maybe 75 frames. It's digital, but it's 30 frames per second. And that was probably probably some of my best footage, and got some really good stills out of that. I've gotten footage of a couple gray ones that turned out pretty good. I've unfortunately got had a Dogman sneak up behind me on more than one occasion, and one of my more popular videos is the Dogman video, and it's in HD, and it's very close, and he's in thick foliage, but if you take an honest look at it, you can see the creature pretty good. Watch his nostrils move and watch him move as I twist my shoulders and turn around. People think I was deep in the woods or something. No, that was what's scary. I think scares me kind of, is that I was just about a quarter mile or less from the parking lot. And, this is a main trail with heavy traffic, both hikers and people on horses. It's an easier trail at the beginning, so you got children and everything. And I'm walking out, and unfortunately, it's an older camera. It's the 480p, but I've got the camera shooting behind me, and I pass a rock outcropping, and then this this thing, it's kind of silver and glitter. I can't even say the word, glittering. And as I walk away, this gray silver subject, begins to form and materialize. And also it is a large bubble. I don't know, I'd say the circumference 20-30 feet, begins to form around it. And as I'm walking away, unaware of it, you can see the portal, or whatever you want to call it, Stargate, portal, wormhole, begins to take a form. And it has the event horizon has a hard, sharp edge. And then looking into it, it looks like you're looking into water. And then you can also see this creature, this entity, this thing begins to form and begins materialize. Never 100% materializes, but I'd say 70-80%. And it looks like it's down on its knees for some reason. And you can see it form and then take pretty hard shape, especially the portal, because it's like I said, I've got still shots and run it through different filters so you can see it. You can see the sharp, very, very sharp edge, and you can see the creature inside, and it's got a couple of decent still captures of this creature, even though it's like you're looking in water, so he's never 100% clear. But it looks like one of these elongated skull things. It's got elongated skull, and so it's intriguing for sure. And only saw it after the fact. That's what frustrates a lot of my viewers, is they'll say, why did you turn around? Why didn't you slow down? Why didn't you go back? And it's like, you don't understand. I have to explain it in detail. I captured this. I call it was my back trail camera, which means I didn't see it at the time. That's the whole idea, because the Sasquatch and these other entities and things seem to always want to happen behind you, or to the side, where where they're watching your eyes, and so they're hiding and peeking. So once you go by, that's when they take the peek. That's when they're bold enough to show themselves. And it's usually not a whole lot, but it's and that's when they'll peek out, or they'll look out, or something like this. The portal thing will happen, and that's when it happens after I went by. I never saw it, and thank God I got by it before it formed. And who knows what would have happened if I'd have walked into it. But but like I said, it frustrates people, and I get it. But that's the nature of the research, and the way I did it is that I was the bait. And then, I was filming behind me, because, they're definitely not going to, do anything overt in front. It's very rare that, that something happens overtly with you with a running camera. They know what a camera is. And they, one of their maxims or rules, whatever you want to call it, is, don't get filmed. Like I tell everybody, there's the law of unintended consequences. And when you seek these creatures out, you give them permission to return the favor, to seek you out, and it's irrevocable, very much. I mean, you can keep them off your property. We can discuss that later, how you do that. But basically, by me seeking them out, I gave them permission to come find me, and it started, like I said, it started with the first overt thing that happened was the feathers beside the truck. And what was happening was 2-car driveway, 2-car garage. Wife, parks inside the garage. I park outside the garage. And so the first, I go out, Monday morning. As I open the door to get in the truck, there's a blue jay feather, right in front of in front of the door. And so I saw that and I thought that was strange, but okay. I pick the feather up and just kind of throw it in the truck on the passenger side, and I go on to work, don't think anything of it. So Tuesday morning I go out and I look down or open the door, look down, and sure enough, there's another feather. So now I'm thinking this is getting weird, And but I throw the feather in the truck and I go to work. Well, the next day I come back, I have to park in a different place, and visitors came over or whatever. So I'm parked in a different part of my driveway. So I go out on the third morning, and even though I've moved, there's another blue jay feather beside, sitting there beside the driver's side door. Now I'm like, okay, once is a coincidence, twice is suspicious, and 3 times is enemy activity now. So I'm like, so I on purpose, park my truck up against, the totally opposite part of the driveway. If this is falling from a tree or this just happenstance, I'm going to make sure it's going to be very difficult. So I kind of park right up against the house, on the right side of the garage instead of the left side. Sure enough, I go out the next morning and there's another blue jay feather right beside the driver's side. So, and it happened again on Friday when I parked my truck almost back to the road. So, so that was like the first overt. And then they started doing stuff like started stealing dog food. We had dogs and they were getting in the backyard. Now we had the dogs cordoned off, but we had a big tub dog food in, and snap the lid, that way the varmints couldn't get in it. And the wife kept complaining, because we had 3 big outside dogs and kind of know how much food they take. And my wife started complaining, like, I don't know what's going on, but something's going on with the food. And I said, what do you mean? She said, it's going down really fast, and I know how much I'm feeding them. And so, I looked at it and thought about it, and I said, well, let's try something. We smoothed the top out. I took a pencil and I made a mark, took a picture of it. Next morning, I said, let me go out and check before you do anything. I go out and check, and the dog food's down about 2 inches, but it's level. And them little scutters were basically popping the top, eating the food, dog food, and then leveling it back out, putting the top back on. And then, they were also doing that. We got a couple of times, we got those single footprints. I got a single pristine 18-inch footprint in my backyard. And then there were several times where I got partial footprints. So they were coming into the backyard, and doing all kinds of crazy. In my research, and, I've written a couple books, I did a deep dive on the Sasquatch Bigfoot relationship, and I found there's one guy that did, and his name escapes me, and forgive me for that, but he basically found that it's a 25% rule. 25% of the Sasquatch encounters that are reported have a UFO involved, and vice versa. 25% of the UFO encounters have a Bigfoot involved. And whether it's Bigfoot gets off the UFO and runs into the woods, or someone gets abducted and the Bigfoot's driving the UFO, or, a UFO, people see a UFO and then later that evening they encounter a Sasquatch, that sort of relationship. And I've encountered a UFO a couple of times, just around the house. And then during a Bigfoot encounter, there was a gray related with the encounter. There was a gray. I got video of a gray being peeking out from around a tree, and then some of my early trail cam footage. I've got some sort of alien looking creature, peeking at the camera. So, I've had that crossover and other cryptid and other, supernatural stuff, happening around the house, from orbs to banging on the side of the house to dark figures, the shadow people, or the dark figures in the corner of the room when you wake up. Even had I didn't know what to call it. People called it a water spirit, and I don't, I'm not a ghost guy, but basically I found like, 10-inch footprints made of water, like someone had got out of the shower and walked through my kitchen. And they started in the kitchen and like went towards the back door and just ended. That was really weird. And so, just, those sort of things. And then, they started coming to the house, and the neighbors were seeing them. And the neighbors actually were seeing them more than I was. That was the crazy part. They were so concentrating on messing with me that, that they'd get seen by the neighbors. And I think they're a combination of the two. I don't know, my theory is that they're a Nephilim descendant. And, a lot of people are, what? But just give you the cliff notes real quick. The Nephilim is a biblical term that means the fallen, or to fall, or earthbound. And basically, in both the book of Enoch and in Genesis, angels, the fallen angels, copulated with human women, and they had a human hybrid offspring. And then that offspring, which had angelic abilities, and one of the characteristics were they were giants. That were the first generation was giants. I think that the Sasquatch are a descendant of that original race, 10,000 years ago or so. One of the things I dealt with in the research is I would have, someone say, I'll watch this thing just literally just disappear. It was there, it was walking, and it just disappeared. And, cloaked, whatever it did, became invisible. And then, the next time you hear one, grandma hid it, in her Studebaker, going to the store, and the police came and got it and, threatened granny. So, how do you reconcile that? And, thinking logically, I think sometimes, some are just genetically predisposed and can do stuff, and some can't. And you don't know what you're, and they're just like us as far as their genetics and having traits. So, some can do stuff, just like human beings. Some people are really smart and have an aptitude for math. And some people are really talented and have an aptitude for, art. And I think, I don't think the Sasquatch people, whatever you want to call them, are any different. I had all this craziness. There was a lot of unintended consequences, a lot of spiritual things that were going on. That I just, as a Christian, I wasn't comfortable with, and I came to the conclusion the best thing to do is, stop researching these things and get out of that business. And but along with it, it started early on when I was working with David Pilates, and we were doing the North American Bigfoot search. We would, there was always a percentage of emails that we would get, help me, we just bought our dream cabin, Murphy, North Carolina. And, we built this cabin and this is our dream home. And, we've been here 2 weeks and, my wife's been scared to death. This ugly creature was staring in at her. And when we go, we feel the creeps. And when when I was out chopping wood, this thing was, was watching me chop wood. And what is it? And the police won't come out. They laugh at me. The wildlife people, they just shrug their shoulders and say there's nothing they can do. And so, it started early on, and then as it kind of developed, and I met a fellow named Steve Ishdahl, and we got to, strategizing about, what we can do to help people, because, we were still getting the responses and people reaching out. And then when he started doing his thing, it kind of just blew up. And it was right before COVID. And I wrote a book and got a little website and tried to do videos. And basically, you know what, I'm trying to help people cope, and I'm trying to go through the different situations and it, both educate those who don't know what a Sasquatch is, those who've had an encounter, just one or, a couple and really don't want to have any more, but are trying to figure this thing out, answer their questions. And then trying to deal with people who have long-term habituations, because there are situations where people have moved into areas and the Sasquatch clans in the area, and they're not leaving. They have dominion. They've been there for 300 years or whatever. So, it's just trying to help people cope. And you said, my advice to people is don't go squatching, don't get into it, go golfing or go fishing, because this is my opinion. My opinion is it can only lead to those things with, like I said, the unintended consequences. If you go seek them out, you are giving them permission to seek you out. And then, once they tag you or mark you and begin to interact with you, it's another phrase that's come along recently. I used to say they'll follow you home, and now they use the fancy phrase, the hitchhiker effect. And basically, not only will the Sasquatch follow you home, but these other things, like I talked about, the orbs, the UFOs, and some other paranormal things can begin to happen. You open yourself up to all that. And, while it may seem fun to run around the woods and slap on a tree and whoop and all that, and it's exciting to try to, get a, if we can get a video of one of these things, won't that be great? But the reality is, you're opening yourself up to all kinds of spiritual things and things that paranormal that you probably don't want to expose yourself or your family to. So that's my best advice: is don't start, and don't go to do it. Do the research to start. A lot of the questions I get are, do you think they're dangerous? That's a, and I've tried to answer that before, and my answer is they can be. They don't have a sign going across their chest that said I'm a good one, or one that says, I'm a homicidal maniac. I can't even say that word today. Some sort of murderer. And so you don't know if you encounter one, which one you're encountering. So I think in that sense, they can be dangerous. There are anecdotal stories of them hurting people and taking people. And there's also stories where they help people, and they've saved people's lives, and they've, kept, children, safe through the night that get lost and get them back home. So, there's both sides of the spectrum, being me believing that they're Nephilim and from a fallen, from a lineage of a fallen angel, that leads to, the satanic stuff and the other bad things that can be associated with that, because even if they're a good one, the way I look at it, they're still kind of running in that crew. They're subject to those influences. And so while they may not be, quote, bad, the things around them can be, and those things can definitely, attach to you and do things, that you don't, particularly want. And so that's why I say, yeah, they can be dangerous, and you got to treat them with the respect. In other words, if you ever have an encounter, the best thing to do is, it's almost like a bear encounter. If you encounter a bear, you keep an eye on it, and you slowly back out. I think it's the same thing with a Sasquatch encounter. If you ever have one, if they're throwing rocks at you, if you get the feeling in the back of your neck, or you actually see one, then just back out of the area. Just leave. Don't chase it. Don't, try to, interact with it. The best thing to do is just sleep. So, that's my best advice on, are they dangerous? And the other thing is just how to cope. I mean, there's a lot of people that when they encounter one of these beings, it really sets off the PTSD, because these things aren't supposed to exist. They've never told about them. And, then they have this encounter with this, paradigm altering creature that's not supposed to exist. And that can really mess with people's heads. And I tell people, everybody has their own coping mechanisms, whether it's faith, and, facing that fear and talking to people. I think those are very, very important, and that's why I make myself available, for people to email me and tell their stories. I know Steve Ishtal does, David Pilates does, and, for people to write in where they can tell their story and not be afraid of being belittled or made fun of. And I think we're fortunate that as the popularity of the subject grows and more people are coming forward, it's more accepted to be able to, talk about it and to tell what happened to you, which I think helps a lot. So, and sometimes just facing your fears. A lot of people say, how am I ever going to go in the outdoors? And you just do baby steps. I mean, you start off with the walks, in the local park, and then you graduate up and you take someone with you, and you face that fear, you get back out there, because it's rare that you're going to, if you have an encounter, it's rare. And it's very rare that you have more than one. But and you shouldn't, just like any other, encounter with dangerous wildlife, you shouldn't let that keep you from doing what you love and going into the outdoors.
By the time I was, 3 years old, I would go outside to play and they would be looking at me through the bushes. I didn't understand that this was not normal, because this has been my normal. And by the time I was 4 and 5, I lived in this subdivision, and it was safe back then, to ride your bike to the end of the street or whatever. And they would come out of the woodwork. I mean, they would literally step out of the woods where I could see them. And I would tell my mom and dad, and they thought I had an imaginary friend. They would come out of the woods and they would watch me. And I would get that mind speak. If I was playing with a ball and I kicked it into the woods, they'd toss it back, those kind of things. They did that with my granddaughter as well. When she was little, they used to she was playing in the sandbox. They would roll rocks out to her, and then she would roll them back into the woods, and then they'd roll them back to her. Just childhood games, little things. It wasn't, if I would go for a walk in the woods, I can remember as a small child, when I walked to school, I had to go by this wooded lot. And I always knew they were in there. I'd seen them in there before. When I got a little bit older, I kept thinking I was nuts. Like, I talked to my mom and dad about it. They never said I was lying, because they knew me, and they knew I've never lied about anything like that ever. And so they just assumed I had an imaginary friend. There's an incident in Texas, and this was back, I'm estimating like 2014 or 15. And I had went there to see two different people. And one of the people I went there for was he had an area that someone was letting him use of 100 acres that backed up against a nature preserve. And he wanted to use it as an interaction site with the Bigfoot. And he had no clue what he was doing. And he had contacted me. Somebody recommended me to him. And I was telling him what to do, and I'm going, I do remote viewing. I can do all kinds of weird stuff. And I told him, I said, I just don't get a good feeling. I don't feel like you're wanted there. I think you need to leave. And he was insistent he was staying. So I flew to Texas so I could go out to this area with him and get a better feel of it. And there was this section where they had all these berry bushes at, and it was kind of like a horseshoe shape. So once you drove in, there's only one way in and out. And we went back there. We had his grandchildren. And we went back there, and the whole property, it looked like somebody literally abandoned it in the middle of the night. And a friend of his had bought it at auction. Nobody lived there. And they had said he could use this property to do the research. So we drove back there, and his grandkids got out of the car, ran down this little horseshoe, and there was a tree stand there. They were playing on the tree stand. I look on the ground, and there's nothing but bones, like dead animal bones everywhere. And I looked at him. I said, this is the killing site. And he said, what is that? I said, that's where they take the food. They go back and they eat it. And the bones are all discarded. Like, you just literally brought us to the dining room table. This is crazy. We got to get out of here. The kids were playing on the tree stand. And as they played on the tree stand, they could see the trees moving. And there were Bigfoots coming in on all three sides, literally. So now they're shaking bushes and they're carrying on. And the kids are frightened. They're higher up in the tree stand and they can see them from the tree stand, but they won't come down because they're too frightened. So I walked past the children towards where this male was, this very large black male, and he was standing at the end of the horseshoe. I walked towards him so that I could get the kids behind me. My only concern were these kids. By now, my friend has absolutely panicked because he's watching all this transpire. He doesn't know what to do, and he's standing farther back going, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, I don't want you to move. Call the kids, get them down. And the kids wouldn't come. And this male is yelling in my head, you will either leave the children or we'll kill you. And I said, I'm not leaving the kids. So he bluff charged me. I was standing next to a palmetto bush that came up to my waist. And I'm 5'9". He leveled that entire bush. These kids were absolutely terrified. So I coaxed the kids out of the tree stand. And my friend's going, what do I do? And I said, get in the truck, open the doors, start the truck, get the kids in. And he said, well, come on. And I said, no, I'm not leaving until those kids are in this truck. I backed up. You don't ever turn your back on a situation like that. So I backed up. We got to the truck. I got in. And as soon as we got in to the truck, I told my friend, I said, get us out of here. So he hit the gas and that black male came up and just sucker punched the back of the truck. I think he was trying to get into the back of the truck. And we got out of there. So I mean, I've been in situations where there's aggressive ones before. I've been very fortunate. I would say 98% of my time has been with peaceful ones. Most of the problem is people don't respect and listen to the signs they're given. I get people that contact me on a daily basis and they're like, we have PTSD, we were attacked. And I say the same thing every time. Were you physically hurt? No. They're screaming at you to scare you, to get you to turn and leave. I do have one photo of a beam of light coming down onto the bedroom of my house, believe it or not. The ship that actually landed towards the back of our property had what they call a robotic Bigfoot, and they're actually sent out to kill the other one. I have had UFOs overhand where the Bigfoot have come out, and they've been happy to see them. Absolutely happy. Now, we had a week and a half ago, we have a lot of dogs, and I went out in the backyard, and one of them wouldn't go out to go to the bathroom. It was nighttime. So I walked out in the backyard with her. I'm not afraid to walk out there. They're always out there. I can see them moving through the bushes, or they'll come up in the bushes and make noises and talk or whatever. So I walked out with her, and she was acting really nervous, and she gets along very well with Bigfoot. So I thought that was odd. And we had this huge craft past the back of our property. It was up in the air. It was lowering itself down, and it had orange lights. It had orange and it had green, and I saw one blue light on it, but I was amazed at how big it was. We had just moved here, and this huge craft, it was a triangular shaped craft, was literally above the tree line and going down the road. It was like the size, I would say easily about 2/3 of the size of a half a football field. It was big. And it went right over. I was sitting out at the end of my driveway in the car so that, because I live in the woods, if he were to come down and I saw headlights, I'd turn my lights on so he knew where to turn. And I'm sitting out there, and I had the car turned off, and it didn't even realize I was there. And it went right above the car. Like I could see the underneath of it. It was crazy. And I turned the lights on to the car, and as soon as I did, it completely cloaked. You never saw it leave. You never saw anything. You don't ever see anything that propels these crafts. I mean, I have seen so many, it's not even funny. My son-in-law took a photo from my front porch of one that actually separated into two crafts, and he sent it to MUFON, and MUFON investigated it and said it was a class 1 sighting, that it was definitely not terrestrial. I asked them one time what they were. This was multiple years ago. This is before they did the DNA study. And I said to them, I said, when I was a kid, I thought they were an animal in the woods because they were covered with hair. I was a little kid. And then when they're talking to you and they're doing things and they're throwing a ball to you because it ran and, fell into the woods. It's not like we stood out in the backyard and played catch. But you watch and you observe all these things and you realize that these are not an animal. They just aren't. And you watch them care for their children. They brought me babies to see. And you realize there's no way that they're an animal any more than we are. And so I finally asked them, this was years ago in Michigan, and I said, what are you? And there was 3 of them that were standing there. The one I'm very close to this day, or 2 of them. And he looked at me and he pointed to me and he said, we're human like you. And then he pointed to the sky and said, and star people. And those were their words, not mine, their words. And I said, okay, that's all I need to know. And they would be in physical form, but then they would also be clothed. And I would be like in the wintertime, I'd be walking around our property and I would watch footprints being made in the snow right next to me. They are absolutely interdimensional.
I've had 2, one from about 75 to 100 yards when I was 8 with my sister coming home from school. Then in 1995, I was within 40 feet when I walked around and made contact with this thing. We had a lot of bullies, and I was a little guy when I was young, shorter than most. But my job was to take my sister to school and bring her home every day. We get about a half a block away from making our turn to go down to the house when all of a sudden I hear a whoop, and then a rock hits the street and shatters. So I immediately think it's bullies. They done run us down again. So I turn around and looked and see if anybody was behind us, but there was nobody there, not a soul. So I took my sister to the inside. We start to walk again, and then seconds later, another whoop, and then another rock hit even closer. Where when it shattered on the street, it shot off and hit us in the ankles. Pieces of the rock debris did. So I looked back to scan again, but then in my peripheral vision, I'm seeing something off into the woods, off to the right of me, and it's huge. This thing is black with grayish white hair mixed in with it, and it's got a hold of 2 trees and it's shaking them violently as it's bobbing its head from left to right. Now it was pretty shady, in that area on that day. So I didn't really get a great description of this thing, but it was at least 700 to 800 pounds, at least 8 foot tall. It scared my sister to death. I mean, it scared me to death as well. After that second rock, it had hit, and I made eye contact with this thing and seen it shaking the saplings and rocking its head. I knew something was not right. I knew this wasn't a human or a bully, an adult, messing with us. I just knew. I mean, just from seeing the hair or fur. So I grab her, we bolt down to the house, and I tell my mom, and she just acts like we're lying. I'm telling her to call the cops because I know what I see. Even at 8, you can't unchange what you see. And so she tells us to go back and just shut up and do our homework. Now, for weeks after that, me and my sister shared a bedroom. And both of our beds, each of our beds were by windows. And I was afraid for weeks on end after this that this thing was going to, hunt us down and take one of us. It was very frightening. What I did see, black in this case, but it was shady, pretty shady there. There were, a lot of trees, a lot of forest. Black eyes, it had to have black running through its hair or fur. And then, like I said, the grayish white tips running through it, 3 to 4 inch layers. Huge, long arms and a broad chest. His face was like a cowhide, tan, darkish tan, like a leathery looking color. Had kind of like a beard that came down to his chest. I mean, I just remember the arms on this thing and the chest was immense. I knew it wasn't a human, even at 8. I thought, initially, oh, monster, but we've been told several stories throughout growing up, our years of growing up by my uncles and my father, because they all grew up in West Virginia and they'd already had their own incidents and, stuff. So we heard stories, but that's not what I was thinking. In this case, I thought monster, and run. It was right there. You had the woods, you crossed the street and then down the hill. I mean, there was houses right there. It was a huge pocket of woods that wrapped all the way around, half of the town. And then on the other side of the town was woods too. But there was railroad tracks running all the way through the eastern side of that ran in all directions. So I just assumed this thing had come down the tracks maybe and got lost. And we walked up on it at the wrong time and spooked it. So it was trying to scare us out of the area. She was traumatized and she couldn't believe that my mom told us to, shut up. It was no big deal because she was afraid that people, somebody might get hurt too. I mean, this was not normal. This is not what people see on any given day. You don't see things like this. The second incident that I had at Todd's Creek, I kind of got that feeling that something was watching us. And then, what happened after it happened kind of confirmed the first encounter for me when I walked up on that thing. That was the most just scary moment of my entire life. A very intense, climb to get up to Tom's Lake up there, and that was the Miami Whitewater Forest area, which is immense, acres, hundreds, if not thousands of acres of forest. The adult one was much more significant for me. I mean, because it really, when I walked around that lake on that thing, it confirmed to me they really do exist. My Uncle Mike, a former Army Ranger, his buddy Tom, who was in the service with, and then my Uncle Brock and my dad, Jeffery Lilly. We get up there, the cows are up there, and we're fishing and having a blast. But about one or two, I started to hear something as we were fishing, and it would move a little bit, take a few steps, and stop. A few minutes would pass, a few more minutes, and it would, if you take a few more steps, and it would stop. All of a sudden, you hear something. It's like a baby crying, and it did it a couple times. And then my Uncle Mike looks at me and says, Junior, what is that? And I don't know, what are you? He said, to shut up and listen. So, a few seconds went by, and I heard, and to me, it sounded like a baby crying. He said, well, why don't you walk around there and check and see what that is? So I grabbed a lantern, and I'm walking around the left turn where the cows usually sit, right off this ridge. And I make the turn to go around to my spot. And as I'm raising that lantern light, there's something right there in front of me, no further than 40 feet away, squatted down beside the lake with his right hand in the water, turned its head to the left towards me. We made eye contact. And as we did, it started to growl at me. I had its whole face lit up. I could see the nose, the huge eye sockets, the flat nose, the beard running down to the chest. This one was a cinnamon brown, like an auburn, little reddish tint to it. The arms were so long, it was just, I was telling myself right then and there, this has got to be a prank. This has to be, what am I seeing? Like, have I gone nuts? That was my initial thought. I couldn't even feel myself shaking at the time. That's how scared I was. And then I remember coming back to slowly because my Uncle Mike was yelling, my way, Junior, what do you see? What is it? What do you see? I take off and I jump off the side of this bridge of this mountain, and I hit through the running, and they were right behind me. I remember at that moment looking around, and we were all trying to get up. Now I'm trying to grab onto a rock in a fallen tree. I'm trying to get up, but I cannot get my legs underneath me. I cannot get any use of my legs to get up, take back down the rest of the mountain. I froze. My Uncle Jack was an Arkansas boy. He was born and raised in Arkansas and had a few of them down there because his job was to hunt for the family, his mom and dad, to get them food. And he had several incidents happen while he was in the woods. My father and his brothers, my uncles, they grew up in West Virginia, and that's how they made it hunting, and that's how they lived down there. So they've had several experiences too. I've been told little tales, that I didn't take to be true. My Uncle Mike, when we would fish up there at times during the daytime, would say, hey, I hear there's a lot of UFO activity here at nighttime, but never did I experience anything like that. Or the yellow orbs or anything like that, neither, or the blue. I feel like when I could not get use of my legs, I felt like maybe it was, doing something to keep us from having power, in use of our legs. That's what I kind of felt, as I look back on everything, I didn't know, was it, the pure rush and fear that actually kept us from being able to get our legs underneath us? Was it that, or was it the thing doing that to us? I mean, all of us, me, my Uncle Mike, my Uncle Rocky, and my dad, we were all right there side by side. We'd all fallen in the same area, and we could not, none of us could get to our legs for about 5. Once I got all this off my chest, man, it felt like a ton of bricks had been lifted off my shoulders. Uh, so I just got really comfortable and just started to write, you know, as much information as I could about my experiences. And I also wanted to teach the kids and the other stories about what, really goes on, but in film form. I didn't want to really impose fear, on the younger age groups. They do exist. There's no doubt about it.